Stacy, what do you want to do to celebrate July 4th?
Raise the roof!
At our last update, we had left off at our plywood castle stage. The next stage was to build the second floor platform, which included building a load-bearing wall and beams for the second floor and the roof. We framed out the load-bearing walls inside and stood those up. We then went ahead and put on the second floor rim joist, and luckily we were able to reuse some of our concrete form lumber for the rim joists. With the wall and rim joists in place, we were ready to build our beams. This was the same as our first floor. It is a build-up beam of 2x10s using construction adhesive, screws, and nails. Soon we had the entire beam in place and we're ready to move on. But first, let me tell you a little bit about our love affair with Simpson strong tie and metal connectors. We use a lot of different metal connectors in our construction, from plates to L brackets to straps, obviously a lot of joist hangers, and hurricane ties. The reason being, one, it helps connect everything, make them stronger. Some things are required by code, and also it helps us when we're just two people trying to build things to hold things in place and give us peace of mind, even though some of it is over-engineering. With the joist hangers in place, the second floor joists went up pretty quickly. In this picture, it looks like a pretty good pergola. And from the top, you can see how all the joists are laid out, and the beam down the center is very straight. During the entire construction process, we have continued to be very critical about our measurements. Our house is still 24 feet by 36 feet long. In this picture, Stacy's checking for plumb on the walls. The middle part of the walls were bowed out just a little bit before we attached the joists through the rim joist. Stacy, through the judicious use of ratchet straps, pulled in the middle parts of the walls, and then he went on the outside with a ladder and used the nail gun to attach the joists. After we had the second floor joists all secured, we did another diagonal measurement to see if our house was still square. And thankfully, it was still perfectly square in both directions. Before we could move on to the next stage, we were thankful enough to have a great neighbor who would allow us to borrow her bigger tractor that was able to lift high enough to get plywood to the second floor platform. To attach the subfloor on the second floor, we used a combination of ring shank nails and screws. We did not use any construction adhesive. This is different than what we did on our first floor. On the first floor, it was all completely glued and screwed. But on the second floor, we were concerned about using glue because it made the sheets of plywood a little slippery on the joist, and we definitely did not want that while working up in the air. Secondly, we could use ring shank nails to speed adding some of the plywood in places where we definitely would not be walking because of the angle of the roof. And then in the center part, we used screws. Before talking about the next stage of construction, I just want to talk a little bit about some of the things we've seen on the farm while we've been working on our house. One day when we came to work on the house, there was a bull moose, and they're pretty fast moving, so we got this one photo. The grass is about 6 feet tall, so he's 7 or 8 feet tall here. We've also had lots of turkeys and baby turkeys on the farm, And we also spent some time one day putting in drip irrigation for some plantings and a bird bath. With the floor done, it was time to move on to doing rafters. We loaded the 2x10s up onto the floor and we put up the scaffolding. Next, we put up some temporary bracing so that it would support our first ridge board. There are many different ways to build a roof. We are doing a system that has a non-structural ridge board that runs down the middle, and then you have rafters on opposing sides. This is the way we decided to do it. You could also have a structural ridge beam with rafters, or one of the very popular methods is to use trusses. Trying to figure out rafters was very nerve-wracking for us. We had done all the math and double-checked everything and put up a first rafter. When we tried to put up the second rafter, it didn't line up. So what do? Well, in our case, we're lucky enough to have a wonderful neighbor who used to work in construction, and he came and quickly, with a simple framing square, laid out a rafter, and that was it. So thanks to that neighbor, we were able to go on, lay out the rest of our rafters, and frame the rest of our roof. We did have to buy some more 2x10s, and looking at this photo, I think Stacy has a ratchet strap problem. We decided it made better sense to go ahead and cut all of our rafters on the ground. So we spent one day just cutting all the rafters according to the pattern that our neighbor gave us, and then that way we could just load them up on the tractor and then load them up onto the deck. With the rafters all cut, things moved very quickly. Stacy attached L brackets at 2 feet on center for the joists on the ridge board before we would raise them. Once we had the ridge board up, we would put the rafters on the far end and then fill in the rafters from the middle, attaching them first at the bottom and then doing all the attachments at the top. With the main rafters up, we turned our attention to the barge rafters, which are the 4 rafters on both ends of the building. They are going to be supported by lookouts and will be applied after we have the main plywood on. They are going to have a decorative pattern, which you can see here. We added collar ties at a 7-foot level to create a level ceiling for the upstairs, as well as to tie the rafters together to prevent spreading. Then we had to notch out areas for our lookouts, which would support the barge rafters. But wait, just when you thought we were done framing the roof, we still had to add blocking between the rafters so that once we put on the plywood sheathing, it would actually seal off the space. We were able to reuse some of the rafters that we had cut incorrectly before our neighbor came and saved us from ourselves. We cut a 37-degree bevel on them to match the angle of the roof, and then we just cut a bunch of them and we went and put them up. Here's a quick look at the final roof framing, and also looking up from within the rafters, you can see how all the rafters are nice and level, which will be great as we move forward to plywood sheathing. We cut all of our plywood and marked 2 foot on center before we put any of the plywood up. We were able to use our 40 horsepower New Holland tractor. It had enough height to reach the edge of the rafters, and then Stacy was able to stand on the deck and pull up the first sheet of plywood. This worked great for the whole first course of plywood. We're going to have a total of 4 courses on each side, plus a 1-foot filler strip at the very top. For the next row of plywood, we had to use a line attached to the clamp. I would attach it on the ground, and then raise up the plywood and Stacy would pull it up. He temporarily attached the plywood and then we went back and we attached it with ring shank nails. We did screw the entire edge and the rafter tails of the roof. Stacy was still able to pull up the third layer of plywood from inside the roof assembly. This time he used a ladder and actually the pulley from our hay trolley system. For one side of the fourth row of plywood, we were able to use a ladder from the opposite side and pull up the plywood like we had done previously. But for the other side, we screwed some 2x4s so that Stacy would have something to walk on. And then he also got all rigged up with his safety gear and he hauled up the plywood. And then we also had the 1-foot pieces that I actually hoisted up to him from the inside. Today is the momentous day that we finish sheathing our roof. Our roof pitch is a 912 and it took about 45 sheets of plywood. We staggered the seams and we included 1/8 inch spacing. You can see how the plywood lined up with the lookouts and you can see our blocking. We were able to reuse some of the concrete form lumber as collar ties. And now with the plywood on, you can really get a sense of the space up here in our, I guess, second floor or attic if you want to call it. On that end, where you can see the ladder coming up, that's where the stairway is going to come up. So on that end is going to be a bedroom with a egress window. And then when I turn around, I'll come to the ladder and then I'll turn around. And then from this way forward, there's an open space. And then on this end, there's a bathroom and a little hallway. So there's 2 windows in this wall. So we're very excited about having a roof finally on our house. It took us 15 days to complete the second floor and the roof framing, plus the plywood. And we are very proud of our progress, especially because we had 2 main setbacks. Number one, we had some trouble figuring out the rafter framing, as you saw. And then number 2, we had excessive heat. We had to get up very early in the morning and then work until just mid-afternoon. And we really struggled with the heat. So it really slowed us down. But now we are excited about the next stage. We're going to put on a metal roof and metal siding and the windows and get the house dried in. So stay tuned for our next update.